The iron gate hinge, groaning on its rusted axis, sounded less like metal and more like the tired sigh of the old man pushing it open. The sound echoed through the quiet cemetery, bouncing off weathered headstones that leaned at gentle angles, as if they too were tired and just wanted to rest. Alistair paused for a moment, his knuckles white where he gripped the cold iron. His breath came in soft clouds, dissolving into the October air. 83 years old, and still the walk to this particular grave never got easier. He knew the path by heart now. Left at the oak tree that had been standing since before the First War, past the angel statue with the missing wing, then 3 rows down. The grass was wet with morning dew, and his shoes left dark footprints behind him. He counted his steps without meaning to. 63 steps from the gate to her. He'd counted them the first time he came, back in 2005, and every Wednesday since then for 3 years. The cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking the small German town of Badenheim, just a few miles from the French border. In the distance, church bells began to ring. 8 in the morning. Alistair smiled slightly. She always loved the bells. He stopped in front of a grave that looked different from the others. No cross. No elaborate carving. Just a simple, weathered stone with a name etched in letters that were starting to fade. Elara Kovac. 1928 to 2005. Beneath it, 3 small words he had chosen himself, finally at peace. From his coat pocket, Alistair pulled out a single pear. It was small and green, not yet ripe. He held it in his palm for a long moment, feeling its weight, remembering another pear from a lifetime ago. His hand trembled slightly as he bent down and placed it carefully against the base of the stone. The dew had soaked through the knee of his trousers, but he didn't mind. He never did. He reached out and touched the cold stone, tracing the letters of a name with his fingertip. The granite was smooth except for one small chip near the letter R. He'd noticed that chip the very first time. He wondered if she would have liked that imperfection, or if she would have run her finger over it the same way he always did. Around him, the cemetery was waking up. A groundskeeper with a grey mustache pushed a wheelbarrow along the main path, whistling a tune Alistair didn't recognize. Squirrels chased each other up the oak tree, their claws scratching against bark. Life going on, as it always did. 60 years ago, he never imagined he would come here by choice. 60 years ago, this country meant something entirely different to a 23-year-old British soldier in uniform. Alistair closed his eyes, and the sounds of the cemetery faded. The wheelbarrow, the squirrels, the distant bells, all of it melted away, replaced by the rumble of army trucks and the sharp crack of pickaxes against broken stone. September 1947. He was Corporal Alistair Hughes, engineer with the British Army of the Rhine. His job was simple: clear rubble, make safe, move on. The town of Badenheim had been caught in the fighting during the final months of the war, and 2 years later, it was still putting itself back together. Alistair's crew worked 12-hour days, hauling broken bricks and twisted metal from streets that had once been someone's home, someone's shop, someone's life. He remembered the morning exactly. September 14th. A Tuesday. The sky was the color of dirty linen, threatening rain that never came. His boots crunched on broken glass as he walked down what used to be a residential street. House numbers were still painted on some of the standing walls, random fragments of ordinary life that made no sense anymore. Number 7, still visible above a doorway that led to nothing. Number 12, next to a window that opened onto empty sky. And then he saw it. Number 18, a house that was more rubble than structure, except for one corner that had somehow survived. And in front of that corner, in what must have once been a garden, stood a pear tree. It was impossible. The tree should have been destroyed. The blast wave should have snapped it like a twig. But there it was, leaves dusty but green, branches heavy with small, unripe pears. Alistair stopped walking. He just stood there, staring at this ridiculous, stubborn tree that refused to die. He looked around. The street was empty except for his crew working 2 blocks away. He could hear their voices, the clang of metal on stone, but no one was watching him. On impulse he couldn't explain, he stepped over a fallen beam and into what used to be the garden. The ground was uneven, treacherous with hidden debris. He made his way carefully to the tree and reached up, plucking one of the small green pears. It was hard in his hand, not ready to eat, but perfect somehow. Alive. Growing. Doing what fruit trees do, as if the world hadn't ended around it. He was still holding the pear, turning it over in his fingers, when he heard it. A sound so soft he almost missed it. Like fabric brushing against stone. Like breath held too long. Alistair's hand tightened on the pear. He turned slowly toward the house, toward the half-collapsed corner where a wooden door still hung at an angle. The door to the cellar. The kind of place where people hid during bombings. The kind of place where sometimes, 2 years later, people were still hiding. His heart hammered against his ribs. He took a step forward. Then another. The door was slightly ajar, just an inch of darkness showing through. He reached out and pushed it. It swung open with a groan that sounded too loud in the silence. Stone steps led down into blackness. Alistair stood at the top, listening. Nothing. Maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling, the way old buildings do. He was about to turn away when he saw them. Eyes. Wide, terrified eyes, reflecting the faint light from the doorway. A face emerged slowly from the darkness, pale as milk, smudged with dirt. A young woman. German. Her hair was dark and tangled, her lips cracked. She couldn't have been more than 19. She stared at him like he was death itself. Her whole body trembled, pressed against the stone wall of the cellar as if she could disappear into it. Alistair's mouth went dry. His orders were clear. Any German nationals found in restricted areas were to be reported immediately. Military police would handle it. That was the procedure. That was the law. That was what you did. He looked down at the pear in his hand. Then back at her. At the terror in her eyes. At the way her hands gripped the stone steps like she was drowning. Slowly, without a word, Alistair held out the pear. She stared at it. At him. Back at the pear. For a long, frozen moment, nothing moved. Then, so slowly he almost missed it, her hand reached out. Her fingers closed around the pear. Their skin touched for just an instant. Her hand was cold. And then the sound of a jeep engine shattered everything. Alistair spun around. Through the gap in the wall, he could see it. A military police jeep, coming down the street. It slowed as it approached. The squeal of brakes. Doors opening. Boots on rubble. A gruff voice cut through the air like a knife. Oi, Corporal. See any Krauts hiding around here? Alistair's heart stopped. He could feel the woman behind him, frozen in the darkness of the cellar, still holding the pear. He could feel the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing down on his shoulders. And he could feel his own eyes, without his permission, flicker back toward the cellar door. The jeep sat there, engine rumbling like a hungry animal. 2 military policemen in crisp uniforms climbed out, their boots hitting the rubble with authority. The taller one had a scar on his chin that pulled his mouth into a permanent frown. The other one, younger, held a clipboard and looked bored. Alistair couldn't move. His eyes had done something terrible. They had looked toward the cellar door. Just for a second. Just a flicker. But it was enough. The tall one with the scar noticed. His eyes narrowed. You hear me, Corporal? I asked if you seen any Krauts. The word hit Alistair like a slap. Krauts. He'd heard it 1,000 times. Said it himself more times than he could count. But now, standing here with the memory of those terrified eyes still burning in his mind, the word felt different. Wrong. Like something rotting. Alistair shook his head. No, Sergeant. Nobody here. His voice came out steady. That surprised him. Inside, his heart was slamming against his ribs so hard he thought they might crack. His palms were sweating. The rough brick wall behind him pressed cold through his uniform, the only thing keeping him upright. The sergeant studied him for a long moment. His eyes moved past Alistair, scanning the rubble, the broken house, the cellar door. Alistair forced himself to breathe. Forced himself not to look. Not to look. Not to look. Right then, the sergeant finally said, "Keep your eyes open. Lots of 'em still hiding like rats. Think we'll just forget if they wait long enough." He spat on the ground, a thick glob of brown tobacco juice. "They won't forget. Neither will we." The younger one with the clipboard shuffled his feet. "Come on, Sarge. Nothing here. Place is dead." They climbed back into the jeep. The engine roared. The vehicle pulled away, bouncing over rubble, turning a corner, gone. Alistair stood perfectly still for a full minute. Then, too, he listened to the jeep sound fade, fade, fade into silence. Only then did he let himself breathe. The air rushed out of him in a shuddering wave. His legs felt weak. He pressed both hands against the brick wall and leaned forward, head down, sucking in air like he'd been drowning. Behind him, he heard the softest movement. Fabric on stone. A breath. He turned. She was still there, standing in the cellar doorway, the pear clutched against her chest like a precious thing. Her eyes were wide, wet. She looked at him with something he couldn't name. Not gratitude exactly. More like wonder. Like he was some kind of creature she'd never seen before. Neither of them spoke. There were no words for what had just happened. Alistair nodded once, a small jerky motion, then turned and walked away. He didn't look back. That night, Alistair lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. The barracks were quiet except for the usual sounds. Snores. Someone coughing. The distant clank of the kitchen as the night crew prepared for morning. Outside, rain had started falling, tapping against the window glass. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw hers. Brown eyes. Scared eyes. Young eyes. She couldn't have been more than 19. Maybe 20. Just a girl. Hiding in a cellar. Alone. Where was her family? Did she have anyone? How long had she been down there? What did she eat? What did she drink? The question swirled in his head like smoke. Impossible to grab, impossible to answer. He thought about his orders. About the military police. About the sergeant's words. Like rats. She wasn't a rat. She was a girl with dirty hair and cracked lips who had looked at a pear like it was made of gold. Alistair made a decision. The next night, he waited until the barracks went quiet. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. 2. At 2:30, he slipped out of bed, pulled on his boots, and moved like a shadow through the darkness. The guard at the gate knew him, nodded him through with a yawn. "Can't sleep either, Corporal." Something like that. He walked fast through the empty streets, his breath fogging in the cold air. The town was a ghost at night. Broken buildings loomed on either side, dark shapes against a darker sky. His footsteps echoed. He carried something in his pocket. Something small. A tin of strawberry jam from his ration pack. He found the house. The cellar door. He stood there for a long moment, listening. Nothing. No sound. No movement. He pulled the tin from his pocket and placed it carefully on the ground, right where the cellar door met the rubble. Then he turned and walked away. He made it 20 steps before he heard it. "Why?" The voice was soft. Hoarse, like it hadn't been used in a while. But clear in the night air. Alistair stopped. He didn't turn around. "I don't know," he said. And he didn't. Not really. He started walking again. Faster this time. Almost running. Behind him, he heard the cellar door creak open, heard the small sound of fingers closing around the tin. He didn't look back. This became the pattern. Every 2 or 3 nights, Alistair would sneak out and leave something at the cellar door. A piece of bread. A bar of chocolate. A small jar of pickles from the mess hall. He never stayed. Never knocked. Never tried to see her. He just left the offering and disappeared into the darkness. 2 weeks passed. 3. October arrived, bringing colder air and grey skies that never seemed to lift. Alistair went about his work, clearing rubble, saluting officers, eating his meals. On the outside, He was the same Corporal Hughes he'd always been. On the inside, he was someone else entirely. Then one evening, everything changed. He came to the cellar door at dusk, earlier than usual. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the first color he'd seen in weeks. In his pocket, he carried a wool sock he'd mended himself, badly, with clumsy stitches. He didn't know why he brought it. It just felt right. But when he reached the cellar, the door was open. Wide open. And she was sitting under the pear tree. Alistair stopped dead. She looked up at him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she stood, brushed dirt from her skirt, and walked toward the house. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at him. Waiting. He followed. Inside, the house was more destroyed than he'd realized. The roof was gone in places, letting in slants of fading light. The floor was covered in debris. But one room remained relatively intact. A small parlor, with a damaged sofa and a wooden table that had somehow survived. On the table sat a photograph in a simple wooden frame. A young man in uniform. German uniform. The uniform of the SS. Alistair's blood turned to ice. He stared at the photograph. The young man couldn't have been more than 17. 18 at most. He had the same dark hair as the girl. The same shape of face. He was smiling. Smiling at the camera, at the photographer, at a world that would soon swallow him whole. Alistair's hand trembled as he pointed at the photograph. Who? She stood beside him, looking at the image with eyes full of something too heavy for tears. My brother, she whispered. His name was Klaus. He was 17. The words hung in the dusty air like smoke. 17. Just a boy. A boy who smiled for a photograph and then went off to die for a cause he probably didn't understand. A boy whose sister now hid in a cellar, surviving on stolen jam and the kindness of an enemy soldier. Alistair looked from the photograph to her face, from the smiling boy to the trembling girl. And in that moment, the world stopped being simple. The lines that had seemed so clear, so solid, blurred into something unrecognizable. He was the enemy. She was the enemy. And yet here they stood, in a ruined house, connected by a photograph of a dead boy and a tin of strawberry jam. The silence wrapped around them like a blanket. Outside, the last light of day faded from the sky. And Alistair realized, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that nothing would ever be the same. Alistair didn't come back the next night, or the night after that. He threw himself into his work like a man possessed, hauling rubble until his hands bled through his gloves, volunteering for the worst jobs, the dirtiest jobs, the jobs that left him too exhausted to think. It worked, sort of. During the day, the physical weight of labor kept his mind quiet. But at night, lying in his bunk, staring at the ceiling while rain tapped against the window, the silence was deafening. He saw her face every time he closed his eyes. He saw the photograph too. That smiling boy in the SS uniform. Klaus. 17 years old. Just a kid. But a kid who had worn that uniform, who had stood on that side of a line that was supposed to be absolute. Alistair had seen what the SS did. He'd walked through villages where the only things left standing were chimneys. He'd smelled things no human being should ever smell. And now here he was, falling for a girl whose brother wore that uniform. The word fell into his mind like a stone into still water. Falling. Was that what this was? He barely knew her. Didn't even know her name. They'd exchanged maybe 20 words total. But she was there, in his head, in his chest, in places he couldn't reach or remove. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. October turned colder, the kind of cold that seeped through uniforms and settled into bones. Alistair worked, ate, slept, worked again. He told himself he was doing the right thing. Staying away was the smart thing, the safe thing, the soldier thing. Then one morning, his crew got a new assignment. Clearance work on the edge of town, near the river. They loaded into trucks and rumbled through streets Alistair had come to know. But when they passed the street with the pear tree, he looked. He couldn't help it. His heart stopped. The house was gone. Not just ruined, but gone. The half-standing corner had been demolished. The rubble cleared. The pear tree, that stubborn, impossible tree, had been cut down, its remains stacked like firewood. And the cellar door, that dark entrance to another world, was buried under a mountain of broken bricks. Alistair's hands gripped the side of the truck so hard his knuckles went white. He wanted to shout, to scream, to jump out and start digging with his bare hands. But he did nothing. He sat there, frozen, as the truck carried him past and away. That night, he went AWOL for the first time in his life. He slipped out at midnight and ran through the dark streets, his boots pounding against cobblestones, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He reached the street and stopped. The moon was bright enough to show him everything. The empty space where the house had been. The bare patch of ground where the pear tree once stood. The pile of bricks that covered the cellar. He fell to his knees and started digging. He threw bricks aside like a madman, not caring about the noise, not caring who heard. His fingers found the edge of the cellar door, splintered and cracked. He pulled. The door came away in pieces, revealing darkness below. "Hello." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Are you there?" "Hello." Silence. Then, from deep within the darkness, a sound. Movement. Something shifting in the black. A hand appeared. Pale. Dirty. Weak. He grabbed it and pulled. She emerged like a ghost from a grave, covered in dust, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She was alive. Barely. Her lips were cracked, her eyes sunken. She clutched something against her chest with her other hand. A small wooden box. Alistair pulled her into his arms and held her. She was so thin he could feel every bone. She trembled against him like a leaf in a storm. For a long moment, they just stayed like that, two broken people holding each other in the ruins. "The clearance," she whispered against his shoulder. "They came. 3 days ago. They said everyone must leave. I hid in the cellar. I thought they would go away. But they kept coming. They took everything. The tree. The house. I couldn't leave. I couldn't." He pulled back and looked at her face. "You've been down there for 3 days? With no food? No water?" She nodded weakly. "I had half a biscuit. And some water from a pipe that drips. I didn't know if you would come. I didn't know if you were real or if I dreamed you." Alistair's chest ached. He looked at the small wooden box she still clutched. "What's that?" She opened it. Inside, on faded velvet, lay a small music box. She wound a tiny key on the side, and a faint, tinny melody emerged. It was a simple tune, something sweet and old-fashioned, completely out of place in this landscape of destruction. "My mother's," she said. "It's all I have left. Everything else is gone. The photograph of Klaus. My father's watch. My grandmother's Bible. All buried. All gone." Alistair looked at her, really looked at her. In the moonlight, she was beautiful and terrible, a survivor pulled from the wreckage of a world that had tried to kill her. And he realized something that shook him to his core. "I can't do this," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. She looked up, fear flashing in her eyes. "Can't do what?" "This. Us. Whatever this is." He stood up, backing away. "Your brother was SS. Do you understand what that means? Do you know what they did? I've seen it. I've smelled it. I've buried the remains. And I can't just pretend that doesn't exist." She stood slowly, painfully, still clutching the music box. He was 17. He didn't choose. They took him. They took all the boys. He wrote me letters. He hated it. He hated them. He died in Italy in 1944, shot by American soldiers, and he was still a boy. Still scared. Still writing letters home asking for cookies. "That doesn't change the uniform," Alistair said, but his voice wavered. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. Nothing changes the uniform. Nothing changes what happened. Nothing brings back the dead. Nothing undoes any of it. She took a step toward him. But I am not my brother. And you are not your army. We are just two people who found each other in a place where people weren't supposed to find anything. Alistair wanted to believe her. He wanted it so badly it hurt. But the photograph haunted him. The smiling boy in the black uniform. The symbol of everything he'd been fighting against. How could he build anything on that foundation? He turned away. I have to go. I'm already in trouble for being AWOL. I have to go. Then go, she said quietly. But if you go now, don't come back. I can't survive another 3 days in a cellar waiting for someone who isn't coming. Alistair walked away. He made it 20 steps. 30. 50. His legs kept moving, carrying him toward the barracks, toward safety, toward the life he understood. But with every step, the weight in his chest grew heavier. He thought about her in that cellar, alone in the dark, clutching a music box and waiting to die. He thought about the pear he'd given her that first day, the way she'd looked at it like it was hope itself. He thought about her voice saying, I am not my brother. He stopped walking. The night was cold and quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The moon hung overhead, indifferent to the small human drama playing out beneath it. Alistair stood in the middle of an empty street, torn between two worlds. And then he turned around. She was still there, standing where he'd left her, the music box silent in her hands. She hadn't moved, hadn't followed, hadn't begged. She just stood there, waiting to see what he would choose. He walked back to her. Slowly at first, then faster. When he reached her, he stopped, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her thin body. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to make this work. I don't know how to look at that photograph and not see everything. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers cold against his cheek. Neither do I. But maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just have to try. He took her hand, feeling her cold, chapped skin against his. We can start again, he murmured. Forget the past. Just start fresh. Today. Right now. She looked at him, tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. Her eyes held his, and in them he saw love and pain and hope and grief all tangled together. No, she whispered. And then Alistair realized that forgetting was a lie. The past was not a wall to be torn down, but a foundation they would have to build on. Every brick of it. Every dark, heavy, terrible brick. The word hung in the air between them like a physical thing. No. She had said no. Not to him, not to them, but to forgetting. To pretending. To building something new on a foundation of lies. Alistair stood there, her hand still in his, and felt the weight of what she was asking. Not to forget. To remember. To carry it all and still choose her. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. No forgetting. But what do we do instead? She looked at the music box in her other hand, then back at him. We remember. Together. We talk about class. About the war. About everything. And we don't look away. It sounded impossible. It sounded terrifying. It also sounded right. That night, Alistair didn't go back to the barracks. He couldn't. He was already AWOL, already in trouble, already past the point of no return. Instead, he took her to the only safe place he could think of. An abandoned barn on the edge of town, half hidden by trees, its roof still intact. He'd discovered it weeks ago during a clearance assignment and kept it in mind as a place to escape the noise of the barracks. They walked through the dark fields, her hand in his, the music box tucked under her arm. The barn smelled like hay and dust and old wood. Mice scurried in the corners. A broken plough sat rusting near the door. But it was dry and warm and hidden. Alistair spread hay into a rough bed in one corner and covered it with his coat. She sat down, exhausted, still clutching the music box. He sat beside her, close enough to feel her shiver. What's your name? He asked. It seemed ridiculous that he didn't know. After everything, He still didn't know. She almost smiled. Elara. Elara Kovac. Elara, he repeated. It felt good in his mouth. Solid. Real. I'm Alistair. Alistair Hughes. I know, she said. I heard the other soldiers. When they came to clear the street. They called you Corporal Hughes. They said you were the quiet one. He laughed softly. That's me. The quiet one. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind outside, the creak of old wood, the small sounds of animals in the darkness. Then Elara wound the music box and let it play. The tinny melody filled the barn, sweet and sad and strangely hopeful. Klaus gave me this, she said. For my 16th birthday. He saved his allowance for months. Our father was angry. He said it was a waste of money. But Klaus didn't care. He just wanted me to have something beautiful. Alistair listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He just listened. He was drafted 6 months later. He wrote to me every week. Happy letters at first, then sadder, then just empty. He stopped talking about coming home. He stopped talking about the future. His last letter said he was tired. Just that. I'm tired. 2 weeks later, we got the telegram. The music box played on, winding down, the melody slowing until it stopped altogether. In the silence, Alistair reached out and took her hand again. Thank you for telling me, he said. She looked at him with those brown eyes that held so much. Thank you for staying. The next morning, Alistair made a decision. He couldn't go back to the barracks, not really. But he could use his position, his knowledge, his access, to build something new. He was stubborn. Everyone who knew him said so. Stubborn as a mule, his mother used to say. That stubbornness had kept him safe through the war, kept him alive when others died. Now he would use it for something else. He left Elara in the barn with what little food he had and walked into town. His first stop was the supply depot, where he knew the quartermaster, a fat, lazy man named Corporal Barnes who could be convinced to look the other way for a price. Lost some blankets, have we? Barnes said, eyeing Alistair with suspicion. Fell off a truck, Alistair replied. Happens all the time. Barnes grunted. Happens more when you're around. Hughes. What's got into you lately? Alistair shrugged. Just trying to stay warm. He walked out with 2 blankets, a box of ration packs, and a small cooking tin. Next, he visited the medical tent, where a tired nurse named Margaret let him borrow a basic first aid kit after he helped her carry supplies for an hour. Then he found an abandoned bicycle behind the mess hall, fixed the flat tire with a patch kit from his pocket, and rode it back to the barn with his treasures. Elara's eyes went wide when she saw everything. How did you? I have my ways, Alistair said, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Really smiled. This became their new life. By day, Alistair worked his regular shifts, clearing rubble, saluting officers, being the quiet corporal everyone expected. By night, he became someone else entirely. A smuggler. A liar. A man building a future out of stolen blankets and borrowed time. He learned Elara's story piece by piece. Her father had died at Stalingrad. Her mother had been killed in an air raid in 1945, just weeks before the war ended. Klaus was all she had left, and then Klaus was gone too. She'd been living alone in their house for 2 years, surviving on what she could find, hiding from everyone, waiting for something she couldn't name. What did you wait for? Alistair asked one night, as they shared a can of beans heated over a small fire. She thought about it. I don't know. A sign, maybe. A reason to keep going. She looked at him across the flames. And then a British soldier gave me a pear. November arrived, bringing freezing temperatures and early snow. The barn stayed warm enough, barely, but Alistair knew they couldn't stay forever. Winter would get colder. Food would get scarcer. And sooner or later, someone would find them. He needed a plan. A real plan. Not just surviving day to day, but building something that could last. The answer came from an unexpected place. A notice on the bulletin board at the supply depot. The British occupation authorities were offering transit papers for German civilians with verified family connections in the Western zones. It was part of some reunification program, a small attempt to undo some of the damage of war. Alistair stared at the notice for a long time. Elara had no family left, no connections, no verification. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need them. He started forging documents that night. He stole blank forms from the depot. He practiced signatures until he could replicate them perfectly. He studied official stamps and learned which officers used which ones. It was slow, painstaking work, but his stubbornness served him well. He would not fail. He could not fail. On December 3, 1947, Alistair walked into the transit office with a folder full of carefully crafted papers. Elara Kovac, according to these documents, had an aunt in the British zone. A verified aunt, with letters to prove it. The letters were fake, of course, written by Alistair in a shaky elderly hand, but they looked real enough. The officer behind the desk was young, bored, and clearly counting the minutes until his shift ended. He flipped through the papers without really looking at them. He stamped something. He signed something. He handed Alistair a slip of paper. Approved. She can present herself at the checkpoint anytime in the next 2 weeks. Next. Alistair walked out on legs that felt like jelly. He had done it. He had actually done it. That night, he showed Elara the papers. She read them 3 times, her hands trembling, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't have an aunt," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But the checkpoint doesn't know that." She looked up at him. "What about you? What happens to you?" He hadn't thought that far. He was still a soldier. Still bound by duty, by law, by everything. But as he looked at her face, at the hope and fear and love all mixed together, he knew the answer. "I'll find a way," he said. "I'll always find a way." December 10th. The day they'd chosen. Overcast and cold, with snow flurries dancing in the air. Elara wore clean clothes Alistair had found, a plain dress and coat that almost fit. She carried nothing but the music box. Everything else could be replaced. They walked to the checkpoint together. British soldiers in heavy coats stamped their feet against the cold. A line of civilians waited, papers in hand, hope and fear on every face. Elara joined the line. Alistair stood nearby, trying to look casual, trying to look like he had nothing to do with this woman who held his entire heart in her hands. The line moved slowly. Too slowly. Each minute felt like an hour. Alistair's palms sweated despite the cold. His heart hammered. His mouth went dry. Finally, Elara reached the front. The officer took her papers. He examined them. He looked at her. He looked at the papers again. Something was wrong. Alistair could feel it. The officer's eyes narrowed. He looked at Elara's trembling hands. Then he looked past her, scanning the crowd, and his eyes landed on Alistair. For a long, frozen moment, they stared at each other. The officer was older, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a scarred cheek. He had seen things. Done things. He knew things. He looked back at Elara. At her papers. At the fear she couldn't quite hide. Then he looked at Alistair again. And he walked over. Alistair's whole body went rigid. This was it. This was the end. They would arrest him, arrest her, send her back, destroy everything. The officer stopped in front of him. Up close, his eyes were grey, like winter sky. "Is she worth your uniform, Corporal?" The words hung in the cold air. A simple question. A devastating question. Everything Alistair had worked for, everything he'd been, everything he was supposed to be, boiled down to this single moment. Alistair looked past the officer to Elara. She stood at the checkpoint, clutching her music box, her eyes wide with terror. She was everything. Every stolen moment. Every shared meal. Every conversation in the dark. Every reason to keep going. Slowly, deliberately, Alistair reached up and unbuttoned the top button of his uniform tunic. Then the second button. He let his hands fall to his sides. The officer stared at him. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind blew. Snowflakes landed on their shoulders. The line of waiting people shuffled forward. Then the officer did something unexpected. He almost smiled. Just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Thought so," he said quietly. He walked back to the checkpoint, stamped Elara's papers with more force than necessary, and waved her through. Next. Elara walked through the barrier. On the other side, she turned and looked back at Alistair. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. Smiling like the sun coming out after a storm. Alistair stood on his side of the line, his uniform unbuttoned, his heart wide open. And then he heard it. The heavy iron gate of the checkpoint swung shut behind her with a sound like a door closing on one world and opening on another. The iron gate hinge groaned behind him as Alistair pushed it closed, the sound wrapping around him like an old friend's greeting. He stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the cold metal, listening to the echo fade into the October morning. The cemetery stretched out before him, peaceful and still, blanketed in the soft light of a sun that was still finding its way over the hills. 83 years old. He could feel every one of them this morning, in the ache of his knees, the stiffness of his fingers, the way his breath came a little shorter than it used to. But he was here. He was always here. Every Wednesday since 2005, rain or shine, snow or sun, he made this walk. He knew the path by heart. Left at the oak tree that had been dropping acorns on this ground since before his grandfather was born. Past the angel statue with the missing wing, the one someone had tried to fix with cement that didn't quite match. Then 3 rows down, counting the headstones as he went. Schmidt, Weber, Fischer, Muller. And then, finally, the one that made his heart squeeze every single time. Elara Kovac. 1928 to 2005. Beloved. The stone was simple, just as she'd wanted. No angels, no verses, no elaborate carvings. Just her name and the dates and that one word at the bottom that said everything and nothing all at once. Beloved. By whom? By him. By the daughters they'd raised. By the grandchildren who called her OMA and brought her flowers from their garden. By everyone lucky enough to cross her path. Alistair lowered himself to his knees slowly, carefully, his joints protesting every inch of the way. The dew soaked through his trousers immediately, cold and damp, but he didn't mind. He'd sat on worse ground. Sat in mud and snow and rain, waiting for this woman, fighting for this woman, building a life with this woman. A little morning dew was nothing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the pear. Small and green, not yet ripe, just like the one he'd given her 61 years ago in a ruined garden in a broken town. He held it in his palm, feeling its weight, remembering. The first pear had been an impulse. Something about that stubborn tree, refusing to die, refusing to give up, refusing to stop growing fruit in the middle of all that destruction. It had reminded him of something he couldn't name, something he needed to believe was still possible. And when he'd seen her face in that cellar, those terrified eyes, that trembling body, he'd held out the pear because it was all he had. All he could give. She'd taken it like it was made of gold. Alistair placed the pear gently against the base of the stone, right where he always put it. Then he reached into his other pocket and pulled out the music box. It was tarnished now, the little silver flowers on the lid worn almost smooth by decades of handling. But when he wound the tiny key on the side, the mechanism still caught, still turned, still produced that same tinny melody he'd first heard in a ruin house in 1947. The sound filled the quiet cemetery, sweet and sad and impossibly fragile. A simple tune, something old-fashioned, the kind of song mothers used to hum while hanging laundry or shelling peas. Elara's mother had given it to her. Klaus had saved his allowance to buy it. And Elara had clutched it through everything, through war and loss and hiding and hunger, because it was the one beautiful thing she had left. Alistair closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw her face. Not the face from the end, lined and grey and tired, but the face from the beginning. The girl in the cellar. The woman in the barn. The wife walking toward him through the checkpoint, clutching the same music box, tears streaming down her face, smiling like she just won the war all by herself. They'd had 58 years together. 58 years of breakfasts and arguments and celebrations and silences. 58 years of watching each other change, season by season, wrinkle by wrinkle. 58 years of building something so solid, so real, that not even war could touch it. The music box wound down, the melody slowing, stretching, finally fading into silence. Alistair opened his eyes. He looked at the stone beside Elara's. His own name was already there, carved in the same simple letters. Alistair Hughes. 1924-2. Just a dash waiting to be filled. He'd arranged it himself 10 years ago, picked out the spot, approved the stone, made sure everything was exactly right. He wanted to be next to her. Wanted to spend eternity the same way he'd spent his life, within reaching distance of the woman who'd saved him. Funny, he thought. People always said he saved her. Pulled her from a cellar, snuck her food, forged her papers, got her through the checkpoint. But she was the one who really did the saving. She taught him that the world wasn't black and white, that enemies were just people on the other side of a line someone else drew, that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. She gave him daughters and grandchildren and a reason to get up every morning. She gave him a life. The cemetery was waking up around him. A groundskeeper with a grey mustache pushed a wheelbarrow along the main path, whistling something that might have been Beethoven. Squirrels chased each other up the oak tree, their claws scratching against bark. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cried, quickly soothed by a mother's voice. Life going on, as it always did, as it always would. Alistair reached out and touched Elara's stone one last time. The granite was cold and smooth under his fingers, except for that one small chip near the letter R. He'd noticed it the very first time he came here, back in 2005, when the stone was new and his grief was fresh. He'd run his finger over that chip and wondered if she would have liked it. She probably would have. She always said perfection was overrated. Same time next week, he whispered. He pushed himself up slowly, using the stone for leverage, feeling every one of his 83 years in the effort. His knees complained. His back joined in. But he was standing, and that was something. He buttoned the top button of his coat against the cold and started the walk back toward the gate. His footsteps left dark prints in the dew-covered grass. The groundskeeper nodded as he passed. The squirrels kept chasing. The sun kept rising. At the gate, Alistair paused and looked back one last time. He could see her stone from here, small and simple among the others. He could see the pear, a tiny green dot against the grey granite. He could almost hear the music box, still playing its tinny melody in his memory. The iron gate swung closed behind him with a dull, final thud. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to. She wasn't in that cemetery, not really. She was in the letters he'd kept in a box under his bed, written in her careful handwriting over 58 years. She was in the photographs on his dresser, smiling at him across the decades. She was in the faces of their daughters, who had her eyes, her laugh, her stubborn determination to see the good in people. She was in the song the music box played, the one he could hum in his sleep after all these years. The unripe pear sat against her stone, small and green and full of potential, just like the one he'd given her in another lifetime. The music box sat beside it, silent now, waiting for next Wednesday. And Alistair walked home through the October morning, carrying her with him every step of the way. Some people never find what he found. Some people search their whole lives and never stumble across that one person who changes everything. He'd stumbled across her in a cellar, of all places, in a country that was supposed to be enemy territory, during a time when love was the last thing anyone expected. But love found them anyway. Love found them in the rubble and held on through everything. Through checkpoints and borders, through arguments and celebrations, through 58 years of ordinary days that added up to something extraordinary. The gate clanged shut behind him. The cemetery grew quiet again. The pair sat against the stone. And somewhere, somehow, Alistair believed, Elara was smiling. Because in the end, the The lines that war drew didn't matter. The uniforms didn't matter. The borders didn't matter. What mattered was a pear and a music box and two people who refused to let the world tell them who to love. What mattered was that they found each other. What mattered was that they never let go.